I'm 100% sure that you are aware of who is Ibrahim Khan, who is co-founder of Islamic Finance Guru, one of the biggest reality of company in the Muslim financial world. Their goal is making money, wealth, and personal financial accessible to Muslim, and so to support Muslim in their path. So it's a successful story, as we told you. I don't want to take a lot of time presenting him. He will present himself and sharing with us his experience. So Ibrahim, Jazakallah khair for joining, and I leave you the floor. So inshallah you can start. And yes, once again, welcome.
Jazakallah khair, everyone, and it's an honor to be on talking to you all. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. So I guess the first thing I'll do is just talk you through my career story, just so that it gives you a sense of how different careers can evolve and how I thought about my career steps at each way, rightly or wrongly, and that can potentially trigger thoughts about what you can do with your career. So I studied at Oxford. I did PPE, Philosophy, Politics and Economics. And whilst I was at university, as many of you will be, I started thinking about the next steps that I wanted to take. And I came across this kind of concept where, you draw these Venn diagrams. It's now popularized as Ikigai. And the idea is that you look at what you're good at, what you're interested in, and what there's a real demand for in the world, and you look at where there's an overlap between all those three things, and that's where you could potentially add a lot of value. And so I kind of figured that Islamic finance and investments was where I thought I could potentially add the most amount of value, because those are the three things, there was the overlap on all of those three things. So after university, I decided, okay, I want to get into this field, but with most fields, it takes about 5 to 10 years to actually gain the experience that you need in order to be able to effectively leave an impact in that field. And with Islamic finance in particular, you have a few different things that you really should combine in order for you to have a big impact. And those things are, the traditional aspect from an Islamic perspective, and also the conventional aspect, and then you combine it with practical experience. And so I guess my 20 to 30s was really spent, setting up for what I do now. After university, I did a master's in Islamic banking and finance. I started my Alimiyyah degree, which I continued for about 4 or 5 years thereafter. And I ultimately went into corporate law. Within corporate law, I trained at Ashurst, and then I moved to Debevoise and Plimpton, which is a US firm, and worked in private equity and venture capital funds formation. And the thinking within law was, as I mentioned, that it gives you optionality to do lots of different things, even if the Islamic finance thing doesn't necessarily work out. And candidly, within law, I was thinking that perhaps, there could be a few different routes that I could go down. I could go down the litigation route, or I could go down the investment route. And ultimately, the path that opened up for me was the investment route. And so that's where I went down. And Islamic Finance Guru actually started off as a blog back in 2015, which I continued to do for about 4 years, along with Mohsin as well, just really as a labor of love, as a community project. And I guess the lesson there is that, hopefully some, if not many of you will have heard of IFG, and it might feel like it's become more prominent over recent years, but actually I think when I reflect back, I think that anything that I've ever done that was really worthwhile, or was an achievement, or got to a certain point, there was always years worth of laying the groundwork or infrastructure that goes into it, the unglamorous stuff that goes into it. So I guess the lesson I would derive for myself, is that try and stick at whatever thing it is that you're doing and be very consistent. There's a hadith as well, ahabbul a'mali ilallahi adwamuha wa in qall. The most beloved of actions is the consistent one, the most consistent ones, even if it's a little bit every time. And so just stick at those things that you're doing long after everyone else would have given up. Because to be honest, if you stick at anything for a long enough period of time, you will actually get somewhere. And so that was, I guess, the learning there. And then I think the other learning was when you're going into your career, thinking about, your plan for the next 5 to 10 years, I think is something that's really underrated and undervalued. Most people just go into their career thinking, whatever, I've got into this graduate scheme, great, I'm going to go for it. But the problem is, if you're doing that, then you're playing someone else's game. You're not living your life, you're living someone else's, life or dream. And so it's really important to not just go into the corporate career or whatever career without a clear game plan on how this is actually going to get me ultimately to Jannah. And what is the purpose of this job in order for me to get to that stage. Anything else, money, CV points, everything is like irrelevant to what you're doing. If you're doing anything else, it's a waste of your time. And don't also dupe yourself. I often hear people saying that, look, what I would like to do is become a partner at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. And getting to that position is a position of great influence, and that will be a great role model. So then I can come on and do presentations like this. That's like kind of giving some kind of role model for people to get to. Now, the problem with that approach is it's kind of useful, but I would perhaps do like 5 of these, perhaps a year. And, 20 minutes or half an hour times 5 is 2.5 hours of impact every year, for decades worth of work. Like, it doesn't really compute. What they should in fact be looking at is, the job that I do in and of itself, as opposed to the label itself, needs to have value add. So yeah, I guess that's another like train of thought. Perhaps I'm going to fast forward now to talk a little bit about Islamic investing and what do we actually do, just to give you a sense, because the shift from the corporate career and the professional services career to the startup world was a big one, and it's a completely different ballpark, and it's completely different area that we work in. So IFG is a startup. We've raised some venture funding. The idea is that we're an Islamic fintech investment platform that reaches over 4 million people, alhamdulillah, these days, annually across the various different channels. And the thinking is we want to help the Muslim community globally level up and get back to a level playing field. And the way we do that is we have a lot of resources and guides that help Muslims demystify what's going on, and also they can see a pre-vetted list of halal investments from across the world that they can then go and start investing in. And 2 of those investments are a real estate vehicle, or real estate investments, and also venture investments. And that's where we actually do that ourselves via our wealth management platform called Curate Capital. And the thinking there is that, we can help everyone by the IFG work, and then we can specifically make sure that the money is getting to entrepreneurs and getting into communities that need it, and really kind of leveraging the value of the money fully, as opposed to just making a profit as well. And I think, for people who are starting out, it would be really interesting and beneficial for you to work at least 1 to 2 years in a startup. Ideally look for a venture funded startup at seed, Series A or Series B, and look to work with them in in any capacity, really, because I think working in a startup will teach you a whole host of skill sets that you perhaps would never learn anywhere else, and you would still be eminently employable thereafter as well. And the other benefit is, if you actually do hit upon a startup that really is growing fast, then the economic rewards are massive, and you could well end up being the CEO or COO or a senior executive at the future Airbnb or Google or Microsoft. and the pay is fantastic at these places when you get to the senior levels as well. So you know you should not discount the the potential of working in a startup. I guess actually a top tip when it comes to startups is, if you're really good at sales, then working in tech in sales is fantastic. Like you're within in your early to late 20s, you could well be earning 300,000-400,000 pounds, or even more than that. So this is like a hidden secret within the London tech world, that if you're really good at sales, that's probably a place that you can earn probably the most that you potentially can for your skill sets. And I guess really the final thoughts that I would have is when you're early on in your career, be very purposive about why you're doing what you're doing. When you're early on in your career, really think about the 5 to 10 year picture and have really strong ambitions. Time box that I'm going to sit down and within a day or two max, I'm going to come up with a broad high level goal that I'm going to get to. And if your goal is like a level 4 goal, then throughout that journey of trying to get to that goal, you're going to be pushing upwards. And it might be that you don't actually specifically get to the goal that you set out, but because you've been pushing upwards, you might end up, rather than here, you might end up here, and that's still level 3 or 4. And so, but if you don't have that goal, you don't have anything driving you upwards. And so, time box and sit down and say, all right, I'm going to come up with that, and then revisit it every 6 months, every 3 months, and tweak it, because it will always change. The point is not to have a clear vision that you're going to then stick to for the rest of your life now. The point is that you have a clear vision that you have thought about, and it's got some reasonable basis to it, that you're going to stick to and work hard at for the next 3 to 6 months. And then you're going to revisit and you're going to tweak and you iterate from that. So I guess that would be the second high level thought. And then the final high level thought is to make sure that you really do start with the end in mind first, which is ultimately you want to go to Jannah, and then work backwards from there in terms of how you're going to get there. Don't force it. Like if you're not someone who is suited to work in the corporate world, then don't work in the corporate world. But if you're someone who is very suited to working in the corporate world, and you're kind of really for some reason inclined to going into charity work or teaching or whatever, but really that the corporate world is where you should be, then don't force it against what the end in mind is. If the thing that takes you to Jannah is going to be whatever the thing is that you need to take as the next step now, that's the step you should take. So yeah, with that, let me end. Happy to take any questions.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khair for this speech. Maybe you can open the floor for the question from the public and from the participant. Omar Fuad is the first. You can go, Omar.
Assalamu alaikum, Ibrahim.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Barakallahu feek for your amazing presentation. I really love the focus that you put. The goal is Jannah, so may Allah grant us Jannah. Ameen. And I would like to ask you something. Alhamdulillah, I've seen your website, and on your website I could find a lot of information regarding Islamic finance, and also to have more information. Sometimes in our community, when you speak about investment, sometimes when you speak about investment in mosque, sometimes people think it is something, you should not do so. There's a lot of uncertainty, but subhanAllah, there's a lot of opportunity that we're not, taking advantage of. So what kind of step would you give us, let's say, to let's say a small Muslim community, let's say a mosque or a group of young people, in order to gain more knowledge about this topic?
Yeah, I would say that in all things, incline towards action, and try and set yourself deadlines to learn about that thing to a reasonable level, and then move towards action, even if that is, I've decided I'm not going to do whatever thing it is. Because I think the the problem that we have in our community is that we have a paralysis by analysis, right? We do so much thinking and studying and looking at for and against, that we end up just doing nothing, and I feel like that's often unhelpful. I think the mindset should be that I'm looking to make an investment. Let me figure out what it is that I can do and I can't do, and I'm going to figure it out in X period of time, and then that, I think, often helps folk, kind of get you through to the right place that you need to be. I think with the specifics of navigating the differences of opinion and what have you, obviously, we cover a whole range of different topics on our website, and we give the multiple perspectives, so you can find it there. But the way to think about the difference of opinion is ultimately that, look, I'm going to read both of these as a rational, intelligent human being. I'm going to ultimately perhaps talk to a scholar that I trust, and then I'll do istikhara, and then I'll act on what I think is best. You won't be judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are not an Islamic finance scholar, right? That's not the judgment call. Islam is not a difficult religion. So those are my thoughts around that. And then the other wider point actually that I think is important to make is when we think about our careers, sometimes we get scared and we have moral cowardice, in my view, where we think, oh, I'm not going to work in X career or X corporate job or X thing, because isn't that like kind of all haram? And I'm not really sure how it all works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to avoid it all. Now, the problem with that is that could apply to any career, even medicine, right? Like with medicine, are you going to, that there's moral ambiguity with dealing with, let's say, LGBTQ patients wanting a sex change, or, someone who has to, deal with cases of euthanasia, perhaps, or, there's so many different cases where there is abortion, for example. So the point I'm making is that don't be a moral coward by just avoiding a career because you kind of think, oh, I'm going to have to make an ethical decision here. Back yourself to make the right ethical decision, because otherwise what happens is that no one goes into that field. And then, ultimately Muslims end up missing out because they're just not represented in that field. Now, of course, don't go crazy and work in, like, I don't know, derivatives trading or debt trading, because that's obviously haram. But what I'm saying is that, don't use that as a cop-out excuse to just not go into certain fields at all, because I don't think that's right. I know there's another question in the chat. You mentioned skills that are learned in startup. Can you please give specific examples? Yeah, sure. So within startups and within business generally, you've got ops, you've got sales, you've got product, then you've got, I guess, growth and leadership. So these are kind of different kind of functions that you would have in pretty much any business. And so there's a range of different skill sets that you can pick up. For example, within operations, you would understand how, the best ways are to manage certain processes or functions. Within sales, you would understand how to sell things and what the best companies in the world do from a structuring perspective. They will, how do they find the leads that they need to target? How do they then automate the reaching out to them? What do they say to them? What's their sales playbook? And then how do they close, and what do they do very in a structured way from a sales pipeline? And then afterwards, how do they have these retrospective meetings within the team to share learnings, and how do they set goals? So that there's a whole range of different things that you would learn, let's say, just in sales. And these are hugely valuable skills that are worth, learning. And then, in product, you would learn how the modern software gets built. How do websites, function, and, how do they, why does Google look the way it does? Why does Amazon, look the way it does? And why is it so successful at converting me to, just buying stuff from them? All of these kind of questions are things that you would learn. So yeah, there's a whole host of different skill sets that you would learn in working in a startup. The benefit of a startup is you will, because it's such a small team and very dynamic, you will just get the chance to not be siloed into one particular thing, but to actually do a range of different things.
I have a question for you, if possible. Like, is there any country you believe is more ready for Islamic finance in general in comparison to others? Like, I believe UK has maybe a step forward between maybe Italy, I don't know, or other European countries.
I think there's a lot of movement happening in the Netherlands and France, from what I've seen. A lot of people seem to reach out to us, in particular from the Netherlands. I know there's obviously a decent community in Germany as well, but yeah, if I was, I guess, saying that where do I see the most progress, I'd probably say in the Netherlands and perhaps France.
Okay, thank you. We have other question from public, guys. Maybe I told you, I suggest you to take the chance to ask question. Okay, Ahmed, تفضل. Yes, you can go.
Assalamu alaikum, Ibrahim. First of all, thank you so much for all these insights. My question was more about if we are working with an community, an Islamic community that is at an early stage with financial literacy, how do you suggest to us to approach this community to, let's say, spread financial literacy, and especially from the point of view of Islamic finance? Do you have any suggestions, best practices that you adopted for your community? I think at the beginning, when Islamic finance was not very spread in UK, or any advice from the side?
Yeah, I think that financial literacy is never really good within the Muslim community or outside. Like, financial literacy full stop is not, great across the world. I'd say that there's probably 2 or 3 key pillars to, get across to people. The first is just really simple personal finance stuff, that if you make more money than you are spending, then you're going to make a profit, and long-term that profit can then be invested. That's true for business, it's true for a person's finances as well. And I think that's a really simple message, but often, people don't understand it. And just, making that simple point in multiple ways, creative ways, is, I think, a great first step. I think the second area where people can benefit is to think about their career and lifetime as a whole, and the various different points where finance and investment will interact with that. So whether that is getting married, or a birth, or a death, or a career change, or your first job, or your first home, there are so many different stages in a person's life where finances and investment become really important to understand properly. So teaching people, these are the points where you kind of need to really focus in on, I think is great. And then I think finally, teaching people the basics of what kind of investments that you can make, I think are lessons that will stand them in really good stead and save them potentially tens of thousands of pounds in their lifetime.
If possible, yes, I have another question for you. Just it's like more Islamic. Like, from what I see here, talking about Italian experience, I can see there is a real struggle with, like, يعني علماء, imam, etc., to ask them fatwa, etc. So what can be the path for an imam to study, understand, okay, how to give a fatwa about crypto, how to give fatwa about mortgage, how to give fatwa, because there is a lot of technology behind, and sometimes even difficult to tell the sheikh what is the topic or the issue. So what is your idea about?
I think it's tough because if a scholar, because I think scholars need to be somewhat specialists in certain areas in order for them to be able to effectively give a view on something. So to give you an example of this, there are certain scholars who are medical doctors, right? So they're better placed to be able to give an opinion when it comes to things to do with medicine. And there are certain scholars who are, specific kinds of doctors. So that's even more specialized. or there might be a, Sheikh Abu Isa is originally a pharmacist, for example. So he is very well placed to opine on things like, cannabis and therapeutics like that. And so he's written views on that and fatwa on that. And similarly, I think with Islamic finance and investment generally, it's not a simple thing. It's complicated. And so, to ask a scholar who doesn't have that understanding, their view is, I think, unfair on the scholar, and if you rely on it, somewhat dangerous as well, because if they just, if they don't understand the thing that they're giving their opinion on, then there's very, very a large chance that they might get it wrong. So it's almost, you have to make sure that you're talking to someone who really understands what you're getting at, and I don't think it's your position really to educate them too much either, because if you want an opinion on mortgages, that scholar really needs to know, how does a mortgage work? How does the regulation around mortgages work? What's the historic kind of dynamic when it comes to the legal structures in the UK or whatever country it is that we're talking about? Where do the funding sources come for mortgages? And what are the different players that are available in the market? What are the market rates when it comes to homes at the moment? So there are so many different permutations and dynamics to this to actually make a good decision on this. And so, really, there's Islamic finance specialists that that I would trust and I would check in with myself personally. We do have this forum called forum.islamicfinanceguru.com, where we've got 2 muftis on there where they can give their views on various different things. So that, I guess, is a way to get access to certain Islamic finance experts. But yeah, that would be my thought, that try and pick a scholar who is an expert in their field for any subject.
And if we don't have any specialist, what is the path we need to follow?
It's a tough one. I guess you can try and use things like the Fatwa Forum to get access to scholars like that. In absence of that, I think I guess in absence of that, you could look online for fatwa that reputable scholars have written, because that would probably be the most accessible way of doing it. And if you look hard enough, I think you will find someone. In each country, pretty much, there's always a few people that, if you search hard enough, you will find them.
Jazakallah khair. I think we have a question. I don't know if you have still some minutes, Ibrahim. Maybe for your fine, we have another question from the public.
Sure. But should we take maybe one more and then?
Oh yes. Okay.
Great. What are some of the specific things that are you doing in your work now? Is that a question about what my role entails, or more about what IFG does? That's a question to Ali. I guess I can approach it from a perspective. Yeah. So for my role, as the CEO, my role is to set the overarching strategy and vision for the business. And as a co-founder with Mohsin, we would split the head functions or the lead functions for a whole host of different divisions, between ourselves. So for me in particular, I lead on the funds and wealth management side of things. So that means thinking about fundraising, thinking about how do you structure certain different deals, the negotiation and writing of the documentation around that is very much in my camp. Looking after and checking in with and managing our team members is a very big part of the role. Also making product decisions, like what does the software look like, what does the platform look like, what does the website look like, are all decisions that ultimately I get involved in. And then the other big role I have is content. So you'll see that I get quite active on TikTok and YouTube and what have you, and historically articles as well. So that's where I guess the remaining period of my time goes. So it's like strategy, product, people, content, and specifically like wealth management related work. And this changes probably every 3 months. So, ask me in 3 to 6 months time what the role is, and it will have changed. And that's the fun aspect of being in a startup.
Jazakallah khair, Ibrahim, for your speech. I can talk on behalf of everyone here. Like, we really appreciate your presence here and your advice. So yes, maybe guys, I suggest you can follow them on LinkedIn. I personally follow them from ages, so it's interesting to see their profile, and even TikTok, yeah, more funny and more softer. So yes, you can definitely do this. Barakallahu feek, Ibrahim, for your time, and we wish you all the best for your future, inshallah.